Welcome back to the Two Into You podcast, the show where we explore the difference between love that lifts you up and love that holds you back. I'm your host, Mary Hayes, and each episode we'll unpack red flags of abusive relationships, celebrate green flags of healthy relationships, and help you spot when someone is too into you. Run by Women's Aid, the Two Into You project helps young people recognise when affection and romance crosses the line. Before we kick off, remember, if you're worried about your own relationship or even a friend's relationship, you can call the Women's Aid 24-hour national free phone helpline on 1-800-341-900 or use the chat service at twointoyou.ie. Both are free and completely confidential. Please, if you can, rate us 5 stars and leave a review. It helps us reach even more young people. So let's get started. Today we're joined by Suzanna Knight and Niamh Wilson from the training department in Women's Aid. They have a combined 50 years of experience and expertise in domestic violence and trauma. So we're going to be chatting to them and answering questions like, what role does trauma play in keeping someone in an abusive relationship? How does trauma impact the body? The role that shame plays in abusive relationships? And how can someone move on from a traumatic and abusive relationship? So let's get started. Niamh and Suzanna, welcome to the Two Into You podcast.
Thank you so much.
Delighted to have you here today, and such a wealth of experience, expertise and knowledge in both domestic violence and trauma. We have a lot to talk about today, so yes. I'm going to get dug in straight away. Can you just tell us briefly who you are, I suppose, what your role is in Women's Aid, and maybe a little bit about your experience?
So I'm Suzanna Knight. I'm Head of Training and Development with Women's Aid. I started in Women's Aid as the Survivor Empowerment Coordinator. And before that, I've had a very varied career, mainly within domestic violence, but I was a police officer in the UK dealing with child protection. I was in the child protection unit, and I also was the designated rape liaison officer for Northumbria Police. Wow. And I've worked with victims of crime and victims of violence on and off for the last 30 years. So that's kind of me.
I'm Niamh Wilson, and I work with Suzanna in the training and development unit as a trainer. And I've worked in the whole area of domestic abuse for over 35 years now. Started in my 20s, mostly working in the front line, started with children and then working in helpline and support services. And
that's brilliant that you've such a basis in frontline services to then bring that to training, and be able to pass on that knowledge to other people. That's why I'm so excited to have you both here today. So today we're talking about trauma, a very big subject, very heavy subject, but also so important in terms of domestic abuse, toxic relationships, and also things like shame. The big question is, what is trauma?
Okay, so trauma is a bodily reaction to events or situations that overwhelm a person. So when a person feels very overwhelmed by fear, by distress, it's basically where the survivor brain is the part of the brain that controls our unconscious reactions. So it's the part of the brain that tells you you're hungry, that, tells you need to go to sleep. But these are all kind of unconscious reactions. And that part of the brain is also what we call the survivor brain. And it's the part of the brain that really protects us from real harm. So to give an example, if I'm standing in the road and I see a big bus coming towards me, I don't have time to stop and think, should I or should I not jump off the road to save myself? Yeah. My survivor brain, which is quicker than my thinking brain, will take control, and an unconscious reaction, I will just jump off the road onto the path to save myself. And that's what happens often when people are abused as well. In any situation, when they're overwhelmed by a threat, which we know that anyone who's in a situation where they're, in a relationship with someone who's trying to control them and abuse them, they're using fear. They're using shame in order to control. When that gets to a point where the person just is overwhelmed by that, their survival brain will kick in to actually protect them, and it will direct unconscious responses. It's a necessary protective mechanism that all of us actually use all the time. None of us would be here today if our survival brain hadn't kicked in at times to protect us from being overwhelmed, from actually taking action to protect ourselves against threat. Yeah. But they're unconscious reactions. And so we know for sure in a situation where a young woman or a girl is being abused by a boyfriend or a same-sex partner, or say in a family situation where they're growing up with abuse, that it's very likely, it's not absolutely for certain, not everybody will experience trauma, but it is very likely that somebody will actually experience trauma, especially when that abuse is ongoing. So their usual resources aren't really available. So the things that you might usually do if you're feeling really stressed or you're feeling frightened, the things that you might usually do, like take a bit of time out, maybe do some breathing, think about what should I do now? Maybe I'll go and talk to a pal, or will I tell my mum, or, will I call that number where I know I can get help? That can just become, those usual things you might do kind of become unavailable to you, because perhaps your survival brain, the unconscious brain, is telling you that what you need to do right now is do nothing.
Yeah.
So that freeze response, the safest thing for me to do at the moment is to do nothing. And that's the survival brain directing that action. It's not a conscious response. It's an unconscious response.
Yeah.
So trauma isn't the event itself. Trauma is the bodily reaction to that event when the person becomes overwhelmed, distressed and frightened. And it's a necessary, normal response.
Yeah. So it's a protective response from the body to experiences like domestic abuse, a controlling relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know we hear words as well like flight, freeze, fawn, that kind of thing when people talk about trauma. What reaction does the body have when it experiences trauma? How might someone feel in their body?
This is the thing about trauma experiences. Like Niamh said, they are very much normal reactions to an abnormal set of circumstances that you might be faced with in an abusive relationship, for example. And so one of a number of things can happen. So the first thing that would happen is that survivor brain, that kicks in and takes over, and it will make you do one of three things: freeze, fight, or flee. It might also make you do some people pleasing and some fawning. So there's a chain reaction that happens in the body that makes you do one of those three things. So freezing is literally freezing, not doing anything, not being able to say or do anything, and your thinking brain totally shuts down. The fight, then you might get aggressive. You might get into real fight mode. You might think, I've got to fight for my life here. So you're fighting. And then the flee is running away. I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here really, really fast. You don't think about these things. These are automatic reactions in the moment. And I think sometimes victims have a hard time understanding why they might have froze, why they couldn't have said something like no, or please stop, or this is not okay for me. That can be really hard afterwards, after something's happened, for survivors to really come to terms with. But they had no control over that.
And people probably do that not just with their partner, have those responses with their partner. They might have it, I imagine, with other people in their life as well.
And that's the thing about trauma, particularly if it's relating to intimate partner violence, is that it can develop into complex trauma, which happens over time.
Which I was going to ask you about. What is complex trauma?
Complex trauma is where somebody is being exposed to events or situations that are really overwhelming them, frightening them, to the extent that the survivor brain is kicking in over time. Okay, so it's not one singular or isolated event, but something that's happening repeatedly over time. And of course, we know that that's what domestic abuse is about, what relationship abuse, child abuse, we know that they are about ongoing, being subjected on an ongoing basis to abuse. So the alarm system in the brain that kicks off, that gets the survival brain to kick in and direct protective strategies and behaviours, that's being activated all the time. And so the person has little or no time to recover from the trauma that they've experienced as a result of being overwhelmed and And so really it becomes much more profound. The trauma becomes much more profound over time. It's much longer lasting and often, can be much more difficult in a sense, I suppose, to find a way through.
Yeah. So is it slightly different to say somebody has like a car accident or something? Okay. Yeah. That it's more ongoing.
Yeah. And I suppose really clearly to say that everyone experiences trauma differently. Everyone who does experience trauma really differently. So someone can have that once-off car accident and experience profound trauma for many years afterwards. So it's not to say that there's one thing is worse than another, but it's just different.
Yeah.
You said it really well, Niamh. The complex trauma is when that alarm system stays on. It doesn't shut off.
Yeah.
So that someone is continually vigilant, continuing fight, flight or freeze and can't get out of it. That's complex trauma.
Yeah.
So the original experience that, as Niamh said, trauma isn't about the event, it's about our bodily reaction to the event. But that can be layered by subsequent events and previous events, which all combine then to make triggers very, very common. People are commonly triggered and they can come out of nowhere. So, for example, I would have supported women that would have maybe have had a trauma history of sexual assault. They could talk very freely about sexual assault, but then a smell or a sound may have triggered that bodily reaction. Because what we know about trauma is that it jumbles up our memories. It means that our brains think differently and we can go into trauma very quickly with a trigger. Yeah.
And I know as well it touches on something you've spoken about before when I've talked about this with you is, the hyper-arousal, hypo-arousal, re-experiencing trauma, things like avoidance. How might someone maybe respond like after they've left an abusive relationship and that trauma is still with them?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about
Well, I mean, the thing is that trauma can be very long lasting, and particularly if it's complex trauma, we know that for sure that it's likely to last longer than, I might have some trauma symptoms for a few days after that, like be very jumpy, be very hypervigilant, not sleep, not feel hungry, might got a real overwhelming sense of, I nearly died there, or I might not experience trauma from that. But if I have, that's a one-off instant. And I'm likely to heal from that pretty quickly, unless I have had a lot maybe of other experiences of trauma beforehand, and that can really bring you back into more complex trauma. But for somebody who's being abused over time, and they're going to be most likely experiencing complex trauma, and it's going to, last for a long time. You're talking to your friend who is out of a relationship where they have actually experienced abuse. Yeah. You want to check in with them about how they are, and they're just not going there. They're just not going there. It's clear they're avoiding that conversation. So that's the flee response. Because to confront what actually happened to them, if they're experiencing trauma, is to bring them back in to that sense of overwhelm, of fear, of distress. That's the survival brain is still in control there. It does not feel safe to them to talk about that. It doesn't feel safe to them bodily. Their body is reacting to this saying, no, this is not safe. And so in order to protect themselves from that sense of being really unsafe, which feels as intense as the original event itself often, it directs the person to avoid. Change the subject. Or also what we will find, particularly because we know that shame is the core emotion of trauma, and Suzanna will talk a bit more about that, the person isolating themselves, even after they've left the person, because we often talk about isolation as being a key tactic of abusers, and we know it is. We know it's an absolute key tactic. But isolation often comes about because the person themselves, they're still feeling shame if they're still being traumatized. To actually talk to someone who wants to say, how are you? How's it going? And delighted that you got out of that situation. And is he contacting you? Are you okay? To actually have to revisit it just, can also feel, deeply shameful and painful and unmanageable to that person. And so they may self-isolate, and again, it's the survival brain, kind of directing that behavior, in order to protect the person from having to, in a sense, revisit what feels deeply shameful and painful to them.
Coming from that, I know you and I have experienced this when we've supported, young people, women. They'll often feel quite distanced from what's happened and can feel kind of really shut down about it. And what that looks like to everyone is that it wasn't that bad, it wasn't that serious, and that she, she's fine. It's like going for a walk. But in fact, a trauma response could really shut people down and make them feel very distant as a self-protection from the same thing.
Yeah.
And another thing that can then happen is that people can get really aggressive. People who've experienced traumatic responses can often be in that fight mode and come across as really quite aggressive, quite angry, anger control issues. And that can look like they're the problem.
Yeah. And
particularly if the perpetrator, the abuser, is saying, just this is what I have to put up with all the time. Look at her. She's so aggressive. She's like this all the time. So, it's very difficult.
The biggest thing I think that I have taken from learning about all this is that so much of it is out of a person's control.
Exactly.
That often there's so much responsibility put on the person who's being abused. Well, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they do this? Why did they put up with that? Why did they react that way? When so much of it is just their body trying to keep them safe, by responding in a way that protects them from trauma. So avoiding the situation or going back to an abusive partner, being aggressive, making excuses for their partner. That's why I hope people can learn from this episode, and it'll help us all have more compassion towards people who are going through this, because so much of how they're responding to this is out of their control. It's just their survivor brain trying to keep themselves safe.
And that's it. And one of the things that we have to understand with trauma is how closely shame is related to it. But in intimate partner violence, we've got somebody that's deliberately trying to induce shame, to make you feel responsible for what's happening to you. And because if you can feel responsible for what's happening to you, you're not going to say anything about it. You're not going to tell on that person. You're going to accept that it's something about you that makes you unworthy and makes him or her treat you this way.
Yeah.
And that's what shame does. And so you disconnect from people naturally because of that. And it's different from other sorts of feelings. We can all feel guilt. If we've done something wrong or we haven't lived up to our own values or our own way of behaving, we might have let ourselves down, or we might have said, we might have done something wrong that we felt, oh my God, I could have done better there. We feel guilt. And guilt can be quite a good thing to feel, because it means that we want to do better next time. We want to, we might want to apologize or make amends. So guilt can be really positive. Humiliation, often used instead of shame, but humiliation is this sense that, oh my God, this thing's happened to me. You've made me feel this way, and I don't deserve to feel this way. I feel humiliated. I feel bad. You've made me feel bad, but I actually don't deserve it. So humiliation can take us into maybe anger, and then we can act from anger. We can do something about it. But the problem with shame, this is why it's so powerful, is that it makes us feel unworthy, that we are something wrong. We're unworthy of connection. There's something about us that makes us less than or other than. And that is a very powerful tactic of control for somebody to use against us.
When you were talking there about guilt, even the way that guilt makes us feel, that, I did something that I feel guilty about, and I want to do something about it and make change. I could see those, like how those things could be twisted into shame by an abusive or controlling partner.
Absolutely.
Like I could really see how that could happen in a young relationship, especially if you don't, if you haven't been in a relationship before. Maybe if you're, the person you're going out with is older and they say, well, what you did there, that's not how people act in a relationship. You could see so clearly how shame could happen.
Absolutely.
And how much of a tactic of control it is. Shame really is a very powerful tactic of control.
It's such a strong feeling. And you said quite rightly, our feeling of wanting to please somebody, you know, when you first go out with somebody, you want to be that, you know, you want to please them. You want to be that person that, you know, that likes you and that, you know, somehow that will fall in love with you. And that, you know, that's a really powerful thing. It's also a powerful thing to want to fit in, to be part of a group of people that accept us.
Yeah.
So we try and shape ourselves into something that's lovable, acceptable, that's worthy of connection. So that when somebody that we're falling in love with says, well, actually, you're not. You did something really bad there. I can't believe you did that. You made me feel so bad in front of your friends, you know, and makes you feel, first of all, maybe guilt. And then that over time becomes that real shame. Oh my God, I've done this wrong again. I've made you feel bad. That's the last thing I want to do. And now that makes me a really bad person. When this happens in the context of a relationship, it's done by somebody you're falling in love with, someone that you have really strong feelings for. And they might have said to you at the start, oh my God, you're brilliant. You're the best thing. You're everything that I'm looking for. You and I are soulmates. You and I belong together. We'll be together forever. And this feels so good. But then that very same person starts chipping away at your self-confidence by making you feel that you're doing something wrong. And they'll often choose something that you're really good at, that you feel really good about, that makes you feel good about yourself. So if you're good at something like, you know, a sport or that you've got a talent, they'll start with that. They might say, oh my God, you know, that was a bit embarrassing. You know, you talk so much about that.
Yeah.
You know, you keep going on about that and it just looks like you're really showing off. They start very subtly and it grows over time. It's not, you know, I think everyone, if they started off by saying, oh my God, you're crap at that, we'd say, okay, that's a real red flag. But the problem is it starts subtly and grows.
It could be like, you know, like little, like the sports example, you know, that like if you're going to training a lot, you know, or maybe you do training once, twice a week and they say, God, you know, you do spend a lot of time training. Is this something you're really going to pursue? You know, do you think like you're good enough to keep this going or get far in it? Or, you know, your time might be better spent here or spend more time with me. And slowly kind of start to question it, you know, well, oh, so-and-so's, you know, more naturally talented than you are. And it seems like you have to work really hard at it to kind of get to, you know, a basic level, little things like that, you know.
Exactly.
And, which is interesting because it, just thinking of what you said earlier on about trauma and shame will make it look like somebody is nonchalant about what's happened to them or kind of they're over it. And very often in abusive younger relationships, adults maybe don't take it seriously because they're like, look, that's just what happens in younger relationships. Or, look, they're just having a young lover's tiff or whatever. When actually these things can be really, really serious.
Really harmful. Just profound harm,
Yeah, like say, you know, a young girl, she's really interested in camogie, you know, and that's the thing she really loves and finds her self-esteem in and her connection and her friendships and her self-worth. And if that's the thing that's, you know, picked away at, that can be devastating.
And I think, Mary, what we really like, what we're describing there is the earlier stages of relationship. The thing is that every person, because you're human, you're going to resist. You're going to try and still be the person you are. You're going to try and do the things you want to do for yourself and still be in this relationship with this person that you're falling in love with and please them. But if somebody's intent on having control on you, that won't be enough. They will want your full attention. They'll want you to start giving up the things that you do for yourself, because the more she has for herself, that she wants to do for herself, that makes her feel good about herself, the harder she is to control. So that behaviour is going to escalate over time into really profoundly harmful behaviours. And we're not talking about the very subtle, are you sure, like you really want to go out to that theatre group again, because like I saw the last play and it wasn't that great, to like, who the hell do you think you are? You know, you look like a bloody idiot up there. You should have seen the state of you.
Yeah.
You know, like really
You're
shaming.
embarrassing me.
You're embarrassing me. You're an embarrassment to yourself. You should hear what people say about you. You know, it becomes really, really harmful, really shaming. It's such a betrayal.
Yeah.
So the shame that someone experiences in the context of relationship abuse is such a betrayal, and it's deeply painful. And then when that person decides that they're going to be really nice to you, you know, that actually, you know, you're great, you know, look, everything is great. And I'm sorry for saying that last week. Or, you know, when they stop being threatening, when they stop being really denigrating, when they stop trying to shame you, and things seem okay again. What people who experience abuse will say, many survivors, many will have told us, it feels great. It feels great that finally this person that you love, that you think loves you, actually the sense of relief and the sense of kind of just feeling okay again is profound. And the thing is that there's nobody else in your life that can do that for you in that moment. That they're the person you want that affirmation and the validation from. And this is it's what I mean. It's called a trauma bond, and it is one of the things that really entraps people in relationships. And most abusers know this. They know that this is a very deliberate tactic. So we need to kind of, when you're asking that question, like, why does she stay with him? Why does she go back to him? It's because often the abuser knows how to actually keep the person entrapped in that relationship by this kind of often a cycle of this really denigrating, shaming tactics. And then this kind of like starting what we call the love bombing at the beginning. We tend to talk more like it's grooming. So then this re-grooming, you know, so it's really, you know, reeling the person back in again. So just to kind of recognize that that's probably happening in a lot of cases when you're really puzzling, like, why is my sister? Why is my friend? I don't understand it, you know. We don't see an awful lot of what's actually happening between them. And you can bet that in a lot of cases that kind of cycle of, you know, benevolent, kind, loving behaviour, and then shaming, degrading behaviour,
and violence,
and violence, and then escalating to violence and abuse. I just think around shaming, we really need to bring in the whole issue of sexual shaming here, because this is obviously huge, and of course, it's one of the reasons why this, you know, threatening to share pictures, it's huge, because if you want to control someone, you know well that that's one of the most powerful things you can do. To control someone, to threaten to share intimate images
or a video of them.
Knowing well, you know, that this is going to cause deep shame and deep harm.
And I think that's probably why the threatening of sharing like intimate images and videos often happens after you've broken up with someone, because they know how powerful it is, you know, and how shaming it is. It's you know,
and they've lost control of you, but also they've got a real need perhaps to punish you for ending the relationship or leaving. And, you know, when you talk about trauma, don't forget somebody has lived in perhaps fear of their life, even if they haven't been hit. They might be feeling huge amounts of fear coupled with huge amounts of shame, so that somehow over time, it's hard for us to understand, it's hard for people to understand who haven't lived through it, but over time you get a sense that your very survival depends on that person. They have your survival in their hands. So you feel that you need to be connected to them somehow. And then we have a trauma bond where you're connected to somebody that's damaging you so much, harming you so much. And I think the thing about is we have to go back to remind ourselves, why do people control other people in their relationships? And the answer is really clear in our experience, is that people control people because it works for them. They get to have their needs, whatever they are, their sexual needs, their needs for, you know, support, their emotional needs, their physical needs. They get to have those met by somebody totally at their control. And they don't have to feel insecure in their relationship. They don't have to wonder whether somebody loves them or not, or they don't have to work for anything. They don't have to please that person or negotiate with that person. They get just to get everything. at a click of a finger.
Yeah.
And that's why some people control. So they'll use whatever tactics they can, including trauma. So they might not hit somebody, but they definitely might make you feel that you're going to be hit or really badly hurt.
Yeah.
And in the context of sex, you might be being strangled. Strangulation is, we know is becoming a really common part of what is considered normal.
Or choking, as it's
Choking,
called, that it's just seen as rough sex being really normalized. But I think there's a lot of, girls out there who are being strangled during sex, but it's become so normalized in younger relationships. And I think there's so many girls who are putting up with it.
Yes.
Because they're maybe afraid of how their partner will react if they don't let them do it. Or think, well, this is just what you're supposed to do, or I'm supposed to like this.
When you're being strangled, everything in your body will be responding in a trauma way to survive. It will be doing what you need to survive. So you might fight back, you might try and run away, but I bet a lot of people do what the women that I've supported do, which is freeze. That freeze response can happen at any point then, from that point onwards. And that can be confusing if you're experiencing a freeze response, because I should have done something there. I should have said no. So that freeze response is confusing to experience it. And it means that it's more likely to happen again, because you're thinking, oh, well, perhaps I am okay with this then, And then we have the other side of this, that we have maybe young men and boys thinking, this is what I should be doing to be a real man. Maybe this is what women want, because I see this in pornography. I see this out there, that this is a normal thing to do, So then everyone gets confused, because what he's seeing is someone that's freezing and thinking, oh, well, maybe I should have to keep doing this because she's not saying no. She's not fighting me off. So, or maybe I'm doing it wrong, So, when we're into trauma territory and shame territory, this is the acute end of it.
So I can imagine that we're going to get this question maybe in comments or messages afterwards. Is it possible to overcome trauma? And how might someone do that? Are there things that they can do for themselves?
I don't think we would use the word overcome, would we?
No.
I think what we would say is that there is a real antidote to trauma.
Yeah.
That our friends, our loved ones, our families, and ourselves as really strong, resilient women can do. But I think the problem with trauma is that it gets stalled and jumbled up in our memories, and then can get triggered. But that's part of our normal body responses.
Kind of be aware of the language we use. So why questions like, why did you go back to him? Is going to be a shaming response, because people are going to feel accused.
Yeah.
And they're already feeling themselves like, why? Somewhere in themselves, they just ask themselves, why did I go back to him? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
So we really want to avoid things like why questions. And we want to how questions are much more helpful. So like, I know you're going to be working hard to manage this as best you can. How are you doing that? Just really interested, how are you managing, which is so much more about really affirming that the person is trying to manage and cope as best they can.
Yeah.
They are resisting. If there's one thing I would love everyone to take on board, is that every single person who's being abused and controlled and harmed by an intimate partner is resisting. The very fact that they're doing their best to get up every day and get on with their life and use all their skills and try and do something for themselves, that's resisting the power and control of the abuser. So when we can really tap into all of that, to that resistance, to that coping, to that managing, when we can see that and we can affirm that with the person, I think that's probably one of the most powerful ways that we can act in a way that is an antidote to trauma.
And I think that's so true, Niamh. The powerful antidote to trauma is everything that's opposite to what you might have experienced. So if you're a friend or a mum or a dad, it's that unconditional love, that you are worthy of love. You are valued. You are wanted. You are so special to us. Just even that, reminding somebody, we love you, because you're everything. But, and then also being able to say, remind people that they're, of their talents, of their uniqueness, of what makes them so valuable to us. Just even those. And sometimes all it is keeping a connection, because everything about what he's trying to do or the abuser's trying to do is to separate you from the people that love you.
Yeah.
So if you as a person that loves somebody who's being abused, even when it's so hard, can keep that connection going, because it is hard. It does get hard.
Yeah.
Know that, Mary, how hard it is to not kind of think, oh my God, would you ever just not leave? Would you ever just not do? You're so worried about them. You just want, but what we know about leaving is it doesn't stop it.
Yeah.
You said it earlier on.
And I think that's one thing that friends struggle with as well.
Yeah.
They want to fix it.
That's
and
right.
they want to just, shake their friend and say, just leave them, just get away from it.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's the easiest solution, but it's never as easy as that. And we've learned today how, all this trauma and shame is woven into it and keeps you trapped,
Yes.
out of your control.
Yes.
So yeah, for people to remember with their friends that actually we need to see people going through this as, resilient and strong and people who are surviving all day, every day. Because often, I think, victim survivors can be seen as maybe like weak or silly for, making certain choices about their relationship, for going back to an abusive partner, for, putting up, quote unquote, with things when actually they're the things that they're doing to keep themselves safe and to survive. Like that is what their body is, or their survivor brain is telling them to do to survive.
Yeah.
And it might not make sense to us on the outside, but it makes complete sense when you're in their shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So important. And just knowing that, someone is trying their best, someone is doing their best. And so it's so easy to replicate what's happened in the relationship in our relationships with survivors. We have to be so careful that we don't echo what's happened to them in their relationship. So we have to do things like, if we think about what's happened to them, they've had all of their choices taken away from them. So we have to give choice.
Yes.
They've been told that they're not worthy of connection. They're not lovable. That they're only lovable by certain people. That's not true. So we love them. We tell them, we love you. We're concerned about you, but we love you. Doesn't matter what you decide here. We love you. We'll always be here.
Yeah.
So the connection is so important. They might have been, made to feel safe continually when they didn't do what the abuser said. So if they don't do what we said, are we going to make them feel unsafe because that's already happened to them? Yeah. No, we're not going to make them feel unsafe. We're going to respect that they're making decisions, that they're doing their best.
Yeah.
And that we're going to be there for them. It's just,
That's lovely. And I think really helpful for people, actually, as we come to the end of our conversation. It's been so fascinating hearing you both talk about this. I could listen to both of you for hours and hours. I just find this so interesting. But also, I think really helpful for people to hopefully understand this more. Is there any, message of hope for anyone who might be listening who this is resonating with them because of maybe their own experience, maybe something they're currently going through, or if somebody's worried about a friend or family member?
If you're somebody in a relationship with somebody that is telling you that you're not good enough, that you're not feeling good enough in, it's to remember you're inherently valuable as a human being just by being you. And that if someone is making you feel shame, the shame is on them. And if you can't say no to them, if they don't react well with a no, if they can't deal with you being who you are, the shame is on them. And that's what I would say. Yeah,
absolutely. Couldn't have given a better closing line, I think. Thank you both so much.
Thank you
for such a fantastic insight into, something that could be heavy and complex, but I think you explained everything so well, and hopefully it's helpful to everyone. So thank you so much.
Delighted to be here, Mary. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you follow the 2 Into You podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a 5-star review and comment, and a new episode drops the first Monday of every month. Remember, if you're worried about your own relationship or even a friend's relationship, you can call the Women's Aid 24-hour national free phone helpline on 1-800-341-900 or use the chat service at 2intoyou.ie. Both are free and completely confidential.